Okay, we're live on Facebook now, so I'll get started around 11 o'clock and get this music figured out here quickly. Are you able to see my shared screen?
Yeah, I
Okay.
see it.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Now that it's 11, I'll go ahead and get started shortly here. Okay. So welcome everyone to Monsoon's webinar. That's part of our AAPI Through the Generations panel series. Today marks the last panel in our series, which will focus on the Filipina community here in Iowa. So we'll go over topics including Filipino migration and the cultural and generational impact of it. Before we begin, I'll quickly introduce myself. So my name is Nguyen. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm Monsoon's community outreach and social media coordinator based in the Des Moines office. I have a quick little agenda here. so we all know how today's conversation will go. So I've gone over my introductions, and then I'll go into some technical information followed by our community agreements. Then after that, I'll give a brief history of Filipina and Filipino migration, and that will lead into our panelist introductions and Q&A. At the end, there'll be an evaluation form that I'll share, and this will automatically be emailed to everyone once the session ends today as well. Okay. So with technical info, I want to thank our captioner first, who will be providing live captioning for today's conversation. If you do not see captions, you'll need to locate the button with 2 capital C's. I included this little picture here, so it's easier for everyone to know what I'm saying, because I know visuals are a little easier to help aid than just saying. So once you click that CC button, you'll go ahead and click show subtitles, and from there you'll be able to see those live transcriptions. If you aren't able to, please feel free to give me a private message in the chat, and then I will try my best to get help for you and get that fixed for you as soon as we can. Before we begin, I also want to mention that this session is recorded and also is live on Facebook. So if you want to view this afterwards, or if you'd like to share this with others afterwards, you can go visit Monsoon's Facebook page. And in the video section, we'll have the webinar that was recorded today. All right. And then for chat etiquettes, please use the chat section to ask any questions, or if you want to share reflections or comments. If you have questions or comments that you want to ask directly, you can write them in the chat, and we'll try our best to get back to you as soon as we can. We want this to be more of a conversational event instead of just kind of a Q&A panel between me and the panelists. So we'd love to hear your feedback, love to hear what your thoughts are. So please feel free to engage in the chat there. All right, so these are our community agreements. I won't say them all here, just to let everyone read through, view it. But it's just a reminder to create a safe space for connection through mutual respect and understanding of one another, which is what we're here for. Okay. Now that we have the tech and community agreements done with, I will now go into the history of Filipino migration. And Marlou or Mira, please feel free to jump in if you want to add anything. If there's something I didn't mention, but you feel is important to mention, please do. I'd love to learn more, and I'm sure those attending would also love to know more as well. So to begin, I want to talk about the Manila men of St. Malo, and this was also later known as Manila Village. So the Filipino migration is really interesting in that it actually started before the US was really known as the US, and that was back in 1763. So around there was hundreds of Filipino sailors that settled in Louisiana after jumping off Spanish galleons. And they were later known as Manila men, who settled down in the bayous of Louisiana to create a fishing village, now known as Manila Village. And they created stilt houses similar to ones made back home. And they are now a large part of why the shipping industry is so successful in Louisiana and also the US and southern US as well. And during this time, there were documented 406 people of Filipino descent around this time. And this is considered the first wave of Filipino migration, which totals 4 as of today. So next I want to go into the year 1898. So April 21st of that year, US declared war against Spain. And if you are unfamiliar, the Philippines was a Spanish territory, or was colonized by the Spaniards. And so in May 1st, 1898, the US Navy defeated the Spanish fleet, which was guarding the Philippines. And then year after that, in 1899, on February 4th, until the July 2nd of 1902, is the Philippine American War. And during this time, the president of that time, Emilio, was captured, and that was when the US declared the end of the war. And there were 200,000 Filipino civilian deaths as a result of this.
And can I just add something about 1898? I think
yes,
if we could just kind of like so the Filipinos, or then the indigenous population of the Philippines, of the islands, basically were fighting against the Spanish already, right? But then I think it made it like faster, so-called, to get Spain out when the US came. But it didn't mean that the Filipinos, now called Filipinos, are not doing anything when we are always fighting for our independence from Spain. And then the new colonizer then became the US, right? And then also it's important to like note that 1898 is the time that it's not just the Philippines that was acquired by the United States, but the Guam, the Northern Marianas, Cuba, Puerto Rico was also then acquired by United States through the war with the Spanish. So our relationship, so I just kind of want to highlight that 1898 is so crucial for not only for the Filipinos or the Philippines, but it's also with Guam, basically Northern Marianas, but also with Puerto Rico and Cuba, because now it's that similarity between like moving from one colonizer to the other, right? So I just kind of want to state that. And then for the Philippine American War, I think this was considered as the first Vietnam, right? Because there are certain things the Filipinos were still fighting, like they do not want another colonizer, but instead we want our freedom. So therefore we still fought. And then there were certain guns that were created that specifically just for the Filipinos and specifically for Muslim Filipinos. So like, I think the 45 caliber was created just for the Filipino Muslims. So the war continued until like basically we were, Filipino revolutionaries defeated, and then the US then came. I just want to highlight that because I think for a lot of us, like especially the ones who are doing like a lot of the activism and then connection with transnationalism, is that we have to look at 1898 as that crucial moment. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, you guys are so good with your history. Yeah, there were a lot of people that were trying to colonize, and we were also under the Japanese rule at one time, where they were in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And so so that's why,
yep.
Yeah, World War II. That's why we're called the melting pot, because of all these different nationalities, it intermingled. And so our features are all a combination of Spanish, American, and all the other, native cultures around, with some Japanese and Chinese.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Okay, then I'll go into the second through fourth waves of Filipino migration. And so the second wave, this is considered the Manong generation. Please let me know if I pronounce that wrong.
Manong.
So this was when Manong, is that?
Manong.
Okay, there, Manong. Okay, and this was when Philippines was a territory of the US. And in 1917, the Immigration Act was passed, and this was unrestricted immigration. So a lot more people were coming into the US during this time, but majority were laborers. And then in 1934, the Philippine Independence Act passes, and this ends that wave of immigration. Then following that is the third wave. This is after the events of World War II, and over 10,000 Filipinos had actually served in the war and were given the option to become US citizens. Then around this time, the War Brides Act and the Fiancé Act allowed 16,000 Filipino war brides to enter the US. And it was recorded that around 406 of the population is of Filipino and Filipino descent. Then we go into the fourth wave, which is from 1965 until now, present day. And this is part of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which ended the national quotas, because before that, there was a quota on how many people could immigrate into the US. And then on top of the national quota being ended, there was also an unlimited number of visas given for family reunification. And in the 2016 census, it has 50,609 Filipino and Filipinas obtaining permanent residency. Okay, now that I've gone over the history there, is there anything else that you'd like to add, Mira, Malo?
I think I just want to add something about the Manong generation. I think we have to highlight that so the Manong generation, they're called Manong because it's the Ilocano word for older brother. No, Ate Malu? That's what it means. Like it means like, so they were the one that were basically for me anyway, or a lot of historians are saying that the first that this generation were the ones, when we're thinking about contract workers, they were the first one that really left the Philippines to be farm workers in California, Washington, Oregon, and then also cannery workers in Alaska and also Hawaii, right? So we were the first farm workers, and it's all men. And they are coming from the Ilocos region because that is the region in the Philippines that is more mountainous and more in maybe like more in poverty. So therefore, they're the one that were recruited to come to the US to be the first farm workers. So when we're also looking at farm workers movement, the Filipinos are a major part of it. It is the unification, basically the United Farm Workers Union was started by the Filipinos and then combined, and then basically they allied with Mexican farm workers. And then Cesar Chavez then became the leader of the United Farm Workers. But it's really like, I think sometimes when we're looking at the history of farm workers, we're forgetting the role of the Filipinos, right? But in reality, they are been like part of the labor movement in the United States. And they had been active. So I just want to kind of highlight that. And then I think we need to also highlight that the third wave not only includes like brides or wives, right? It also included like Ate Malu, who's a nurse. So there were like doctors, nurses that were coming to the US in the 1960s to work in the medical field. And then I think, right, Ate Malu?
Yeah, because like for instance, the generation of our parents, they were sent by our Philippine government to come to school here in the United States with a condition that they go back and share what they've learned from the United States, the education, and share that back to the Filipinos. And that's how we improved our education portion of our country. So yeah, there were several waves, and you're right about that. And that's why on the second wave, when you mentioned about laborers and workers, plantation workers, that explains why there's a large population of Filipinos in California, in Hawaii, and in Alaska. That's why we're wondering, how come there's so many Filipinos all over the world? Yes. We are mainly laborers, workers, you know, in different areas, professionals, whatever. So, yeah.
And then adding to that, Filipinos were also then recruited as navies, as in the military. And a lot of my uncles were part of that movement when we're thinking about third wave or even second wave, because like we were the part of the US territory, right? We were then, and then we were given the so-called independence. But then at the same time, there were still the US military bases in Subic and Clark. In reality, they are recruiting Filipinos to be US Navy. So we were, you know, like 1960s, 50s, there were like a lot of Filipinos who were then being recruited as part of the US Navy, but they were treated like Black folks. So if you are looking at the civil rights movement, if the, you know, Filipinos cannot be like officers around that time, because the fact that Black men cannot be officers because of the issue of there's no civil rights, right? So they were only like getting work as mess hall boys. So therefore, I think that is also an important component, that how we are deeply connected with how we are treated. We were treated like Black folks. Filipinos were treated like Black folks. Like if you look at the Manong generation, they were also lynched, because if they are seeing a white woman in California, they are basically then lynched, right? So there was like race riots against Filipinos. So I think that is I think Filipino history is so like embedded with the US history that I think that sometimes we don't talk about.
Yes, I definitely agree. Thank you for sharing that, Mira and Malou. When I was researching more about Filipino history and migration, I mean, it's the Filipino history is US history, and a very big part in due to why the US has become so successful, especially when reading about how the Filipino farmers were the first ones to start the union and to really bring people together and community together to fight for themselves. Like they have always been in the history of the Philippines as well. There's that kind of pattern of always having to fight for yourself, especially with Spanish colonization and later US colonization.
You know, in addition to that, the Philippines, the location, our country is strategically located. So in case of war, we're in the middle. And that's why when you mentioned about the military, the Navy, that's where the naval centers, it was perfect there, because if you visit the Philippines, Corregidor is one of the islands there wherein, you know, before they can attack another country, they have to go through that. So we're in the middle. So that's why we got colonized by so many different nationalities.
Yeah.
So
We're like the coaling station. So
yeah.
that's why when you have the Vietnam War, right, or even the Korean War, the Philippines has been always the base for the U.S. military. So it's easier to have.
Okay.
And when America came to the Philippines, that's how they introduced the government of democracy. That's why we ended up with a democratic government. And that's what we had adapted from then on.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for sharing. It's really interesting to hear and learn about all of this. Okay. Well, now that we've gone over that, I also want to mention Take Out with Lisa Ling. This is a really great documentary series that goes over different Asian communities. And it especially is really fascinating to me because it tells the history of different cultures and especially how they've come to the US through food and learning about food. Because for me, at least, I know food can say so much. It says so much about history. It can show emotion. It can show community. And so I really recommend anyone viewing to go and check this out. They have the very first episode is on Filipino and Filipina communities, and it also talks about the history of the Manila Village and kind of going into present day Filipinos in America. All right. So now I'd like to welcome our panelists, Marlou and Mira. So thank you both for being part of this conversation. I really greatly appreciate you both being here to share your stories and experiences. So I want to pass it to you, and if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourselves, Marlou or Mira. You can talk about where you've lived in Iowa, any organizations you've been involved with, or anything else you'd like us to know.
You want me to start, Mira?
Yes, please start, Ate Marlou.
Oh, okay. So anyway, when you mentioned about different waves of immigrants, Filipino immigrants, I think I fall under the 1980s because I arrived in the United States in 1981. And I did it on my own, wherein I applied in a hospital. My degree is Bachelor of Science in Nursing. So I wanted to be independent. So and at that time, to go away from your parents and go to another country, which is the United States, is like following your dream. So came here in 1981, and I worked at Iowa Methodist Medical Center, which is Unity Point, and have worked there since I finally retired in 2018. So that's about 38 years of employment in the same hospital. So I retired in 2018, and unbeknownst to me, that was before COVID. So in my earlier days, I met my husband here, Roel, and he was also here for studies. He decided to go to advanced studies. So he was with Iowa State University. And so we met, and we just decided Iowa is the place to grow, and just decided this would be home. So we got married here and raised 3 kids. So we have 3 sons. And so we just call this home now. So Philippines is also our home. So we're lucky we have 2 homes. So what else do you want to know about me? So that's my history. So I speak 2 languages. I'm English and Tagalog. And one thing I'm proud about our Filipino language, like that manong you were saying, that's how we address our elders. Manong for male, elderly, or tío for uncle. Or we also say po, which is the way we address our elders. Manang for females. So we always say that whenever or like Mira always calls me ate. When someone's older, you call them with those terms before their name, like ate Malu or whatever. So in the Philippines, when you go now, they emphasize that so much. You will notice even if they're younger than you or older than you, they even call you ate or po. It's just a habit now, and I'm just so proud of that. So one of the values that was instilled in us was respect for elders and support of family. And it's not unusual if in your home you have extended families, like you could have your mother, your father, your children. It's okay. Because I lived with my parents when I was in the Philippines, even when I finally graduated and I was already working, and I worked there for a year after graduation. And then when I decided to finally come here to the United States. So that's all I can say for now. So it's your turn, Mira.
So hello, everyone. Again, my name is Mira Yusef, or sometimes I think family members calls me Myra because that is my nickname, or there are like different nicknames that I have, right? So I'm the executive director of Monsoon. I decided to be part of this panelist because Anne was having a hard time finding one. So I'm like, hey, I'm Filipino. I guess I have to be part of it. So I am a first generation immigrant. My mom came to the US as a wife of an American who is from Iowa. So therefore, I think I'm one of those generation of like the first, I left the Philippines when I was 12 or 13, but I didn't go here yet. I was in United Kingdom. I lived in Wales with my auntie, my uncle was in the US military, and they were stationed in Wales. So that's where I first went to. And then my mom married someone who's from Iowa, then she came here, and then I joined them afterwards. So, and then in Iowa, so I was here for 3 years, and then after that I left Iowa for California. So basically most of my adult life, or like from 18 till I forgot what age, till 2001, I was in San Francisco area because majority of my relatives are there, and therefore like I live there. What else are there? Other questions? So I'm Kapampangan. So in the Philippines, there are, I forgot how many numbers of different languages. So we are, we have different language. So we basically, it's an ethno-linguistic group, right? So my ethno-linguistic group is Kapampangan, who are the people from the middle part of Luzon. And I think Ate Malu has Kapampangan in her. So we are the ones who live like right next to the volcano. Our land is like fertile in comparison to the Filipinos, or to the group that are like more mountain area. So therefore, our community is known for cooking, are known for our food, because we have, we are so-called privileged or blessed to have all those food that's surrounding us, right? So I'm Kapampangan. So therefore, like I speak Kapampangan and then Tagalog, which is like the primary language of the Philippines. I also want to just add that in the Philippines, my language specifically is not gendered, and then Tagalog is also not gendered. So therefore, there's only one, like we don't say he or she, we say siya, S-I-Y-A. Right? And now in the Philippines, there's this term that is so gender neutral called mamsir. Ate Malu, right? There's that term. They don't, like mamsir. So in a live voice, when I was thinking about like Filipino, Filipina, because I don't like the X, I'm just gonna be honest. I don't like when it's like the Philippine X. I don't know. It's like, for me, it's like, no, X is not part of our alphabet, right? So for me, I'll just say siya, or now in the Philippines, they say mamsir. So for me, like, I think when we're thinking about like even gender, I think, I don't know why I went to this conversation, but anyway, because I guess we were talking about language, right? What other things do you want me to do?
I think you covered it all pretty well, Mira and Marlou. Thank
Like
you.
just an introduction. Okay.
But that was a really interesting what you brought up, Mira, about the X. I know, especially in other communities, when talking to people I know using X, it's kind of this conversation of like modern day colonization of our language almost, to kind of use that romanization of the X when oftentimes we do have gender neutral terms already in existence in our language. So
yeah. And also, I think there's this thing where if you are educated or grew up in the West or in the United States or even in Europe, that I think in a lot of ways we are the ones who were born and raised here or maybe had been here are the one that bringing in values back home, right? So therefore, like, I don't think we're kind of like the new colonizer in some way, the ones who are born and raised here, had been here, thinking that we are better when in reality, we're not. So I just kind of want to highlight that.
thank you.
Yeah.
All right, now that we've gone over introductions, I'll go into our first question of our Q&A. So just to start, would you both tell us the story of how your family or you came to the US and then later Iowa?
Okay, in my case, oh my God, I came from strict parents. So it was kind of dictated by my parents that I come to Iowa because my older sister is here already. I wanted to go with my classmates to Chicago, to a bigger city, but no, it has to be Iowa. So being an obedient child, I followed my parents, and then I liked it. So I'm glad that this is where I went. So I came to Iowa, and this is where I've been since. Visited all other states, but still Iowa is where my heart goes, and no regrets, because definitely it's a place to grow. So been here since 1981, and first was in Des Moines, and then we moved to the suburbs when the kids were growing up. So I currently live in Grimes, Iowa now.
I think I shared like how we came to the Iowa already, like about my mom moving here first, and then because of like she married someone who's from here, right? So I think that is, and then I came back to Iowa back in 2001 or 2000, yeah, 2001, because I couldn't, for some reason, I'm a non-traditional student. I couldn't like complete my bachelor's degree in San Francisco, and I already have then a child. I was married. So for me, I think it was more like my mom telling me, like, come back, just complete it. Because in California, I was just so busy doing other stuff. It was just so much fun, right? It's like I have friends there. Now I don't have no friends here, but there is like I had my crew. So therefore I couldn't finish it. I got married there. My child was born there. But it was really like coming back here to just complete it. So I went to Drake for 2 years and then completed it. But then this is where basically like it's so weird because this is where Monsoon was started because I was bored in Iowa. I was just so bored. Like, I think it was my last year at Drake where I was just really bored. I was like, what am I going to do now? Because me and my ex-husband were like, just thinking about like, okay, just finish it and then come back. But then I started Monsoon, and that's where, for a year, but then I went to grad school, and then I also did Fulbright in the Philippines. So then we left in 2004 after I started Monsoon, but came back like in 2007 because no one from the community would like to like apply for the ED position at Monsoon when Monsoon then became a nonprofit. So I came back and I stayed. I stayed longer than I'm supposed to. I'm no longer married. I'm married to the work. My child is now almost going to be 22, but now in Minneapolis. So therefore, I think there's this, for me, Iowa is this space where I started something. I just felt like I need to come back and just kind of continue it. And I just love the work. And then, yeah, so that's why I'm still here.
Awesome.
But it doesn't mean that I'm not connected to the other communities, right? So I'm still deeply connected with communities back in the Philippines, and then, you know, like my network like nationally. So I'm all good.
Gotcha. Thank you both for sharing. Okay. So the next question I have is, what does it mean to have a home on both sides of the globe?
For me, I'm a US citizen, but I'm Filipino by heart still, okay, and also an American. I've lived here longer now than I have lived in the Philippines. And since my children are here and they were born and raised here, whenever we go home to the Philippines, which I have taken them so many times, they enjoy it there. And so that is also home to them. So I think it's an advantage to be able to go to two different countries. And you know what? I am a dual citizen. And that's one thing nice about the Philippines and the relationship with the United States, because they recognize dual citizenship. So I am both a US citizen, and then I acquired back my US citizen. So that's an advantage for me. And then we go home whenever we want to, but now that we're retired, we plan to be home every year. And recently we were just home because on my husband's side, he has actually all his family there. On my side, we're all here. So that's the advantage. So you see the best of both worlds is what I'm gonna say. And like what Mira said, in the Philippines and in our hometown, Pampanga, my mom is also from Tarlac, which is also Kapampangan. And then my dad is Ilocano, which is in La Union side. And that's all in Luzon, and they speak different language or dialect, but the common language is what we call Filipino or Tagalog, and then English is a universal language in the Philippines. So for some reason, we're able to communicate, and it's okay. So yeah, we enjoy all that variety of food, fruits. You know, I miss all the fruits, the native delicacies that we have. So when we go home, it's like something I crave for. But I'm glad that here in America and all over the United States are Filipinos, and we're good at food. So you can buy like that Lisa Ling take home. Oh my God, wherever you go, there's Filipino restaurants, Filipino food trucks. So that's what we crave for. So I actually get homesick still, but it's good to know that it's also available here. But when you go home to the Philippines, oh my God, you will just enjoy it. So my kids enjoy going home.
So with me, I think I'm straddling both worlds, right? Being in the US, being a US citizen, having that privilege of having the US passport. But then at the same time, the fact that I was born and raised in the Philippines until I was 12. So I have both. And then I live with my mother, and we speak Kapampangan. So I am straddling both. And but in the US, I'm not American enough because I'm not white, right? But then being in the Philippines, I'm too American because I am the one. I remember like when I was living there as a Fulbrighter, and I had like rented an apartment, and my relatives will just come without calling me. I'm like, call first, right? Don't just come. Because so that is like the American side of me. Like there's this part of me that I just like being like the privacy, the introvertedness, right? But then that's not for them. And then my child who's mixed, half Black, half Filipino, who's also like, she doesn't do the mano. You know, mano is where you basically, you know, like you do this to the elders, right? She doesn't do that. She learned it from there. But it's like she's too American. So I think having both side is all good. But I think being in the US, I think, so I'm kind of just connecting our work where, you know, we're immigrants, we're visitors in this land, we're settler colonialists, right? This is the land of the Native Americans. I think we are deeply connected with our homeland because anything that happens to our homeland, we still are connected to them because of our relatives. So Filipinos will send like balikbayan boxes. Like balikbayans balik means to return, bayan means country. So you return home. So you would send like, you know, you send money, you send like just gifts, like big boxes back home, because there's that feeling of we still need to take care of each other. So they see us being here in the United States as rich, when in reality, we're also struggling, right? So I think there's that deeply connected, like we cannot take away the Filipino in us, even though how much we might say that we've been here for so long, just like Ate Marlou said. And then the one who were born and raised here, they're still deeply connected because, you know, the family, we're just like so much, you know, like we're all about the family. Even though we, like some of us might not speak the language anymore. I speak Kapampangan fluently, but Tagalog, it's kind of now okay, because I don't speak as much Tagalog, but they're still Filipinos because our parents have, like, you know, we have to respect elders. We cannot talk back. We have to take care of just family members, this generosity. I mean, so I think we're both. You know, I just like that being both. And then also, if we look at, like, so let's just talk about transnational issues. I think we need to like, with me, I care a lot about what's going on in the Philippines. It's because, like, when we assist Filipinos who come here, like maybe like who are newly immigrant, who married US, you know, Americans who are living in Iowa, they are still deeply connected. And then they are feeling isolated, right? So therefore, for me, it's like it is important that organizations like us are in existence, because we could then like provide anything that they will need to be safe and to be accepted, and just to kind of like to just feel safe, and to, I don't know, just kind of, I don't know, Ate Marlou, like that is important, having those services.
Yes,
right?
because I see organizations as support groups and also as resources. For instance, if you were a newcomer and then you wanted to know where should I live, or where do you buy your groceries, or you know, we need that support group, especially if they don't have families around. For me, I was lucky because I have a sister around, but there are some people, they come here, they marry somebody, and so they need somebody to talk to and just get connected. So for me, the resource is important because these organizations are able to provide a pool of resources. Like if they needed a lawyer, if they needed a doctor, you know, those are the information and education that we can help one another. And one thing I like about organizations that encompasses all Asians, like Monsoon, for instance, it's not just geared towards Filipinos, it's all Asian groups. And then I think that intermingling of all Asians, because we're diverse, but yet we're very similar, because we have the same traditions. We just practice it in a different way. But, you know, like we love getting together. We love to eat. We love to dance. And so getting to know different culture, like it makes it exciting. So that's one thing good about it.
Thank you both for sharing. I really liked, I remember it previously mentioned this idea of taking care of one another. And that was kind of like a reoccurring pattern I was hearing. And I think that definitely like resonates with me, and I think a lot of the Asian community, because when we think about home on both sides, we think of our relatives at home, and we feel connected to the homeland through them. And I know, especially through stories I hear from other people, when we go back to the motherland, our relatives there take care of us, they show us the way, they make sure we're doing okay, we're having a good time, and we do the same for them when they visit if they can. And I think when we translate that into our own communities here, like how Monsoon does, I think it's a really wonderful thing to do, and it really brings that kind of home to this side of the globe as well as the other side. Okay. So the next question I have is, how did your family or you preserve traditions from the homeland?
Well, what we did was, like in holidays, we interjected our traditions into the holidays, like how we practice Christmas there. So we do the, you know, here we don't have the simbang gabi, which is going to mass at night, at midnight. But, you know, what we do is we have the Noche Buena, wherein you get together midnight of Christmas. And it's more of family togetherness, because in the Philippines, we all eat together. All our meals are together. When I first came to America, it was so lonely because you were eating alone because everybody's so busy. Everybody had their own activities. But, you know, when starting a family, we made that a tradition wherein we eat together. So, and then we have fiestas, and fiestas are like parties. So we celebrate everything. We celebrate birthdays, we celebrate house blessing. Like if you have a new house, you get a priest to bless your house. We celebrate, we don't have Mother's Day there or Father's Day, but we do that every day. So the fiestas is what we enjoy. Oh, fiestas is when a town has an anniversary for the town, and then they put saints in it, because the Philippines is mostly Catholic. So we have like processions and all that. So anyway, here in America, what we do is we follow some of our customs. And the one thing that I regret, I did not teach my kids our language, but now my youngest son is so interested in it. And thankfully in technology, they have translation. So when we chat on Messenger, he would answer me in Tagalog, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I've been hacked. And it's my son, because he's been. So now I see the interest in him. And it's so hard because he has the slang. So sometimes I have to correct him, and it's good to teach your kids your language, because when you go home, that means they don't get tricked or you know, fooled by anybody. So that's one regret. So that will be my advice for everybody. Teach your kids your language. And then like the traditions, you know, we instill respect to the elders. You know, we have Lola, which is our grandparents. So they're always close. You know, you're always close to your family. Yeah, and those are traditions that we continue wherever we are.
Oh my God. Okay. So with me, I think it's more about the values that I think that I would like to continue. Like there's certain values of bayanihan, kapwa. Bayanihan means like community building or helping each other. Kapwa is like someone that is, I think it's bayanihan, but it's more your connection with others, right? So I think those are so important for me. So how I do it, so even my activism, in my opinion, that's part of a Filipino tradition. Filipinos are all about the fierceness of being able to make changes, to be all about social justice. So that is something that is more for me than the you know, like rituals. So for me, it's you know, like if we are fighting for our freedom from Spain, I think those are the things that more embedded in me than anything else. The thing about making sure everyone is taken care of, even if they're not family members, but they're community members, or even just your community, your you know, the society. How then do we take care of each other? So I think that is more the tradition or the value that is for me. I want to kind of continue because in a lot of ways, and when I think I moved to California, I think part of me is I really learned about activism from there. Therefore, I think those are the things that more highlighted than anything else with me. So it's quite different. Yeah.
Okay, thank you both for sharing. So kind of shifting the tone here a little bit, I want to ask, what do you feel is the most challenging part of moving to a new country, and how did your family or you overcome this?
Well, you got separated from your parents initially, but as you grow up, you know, you want to get your independence. So that was challenging, to be separated from family. And then for me, of course, I met my husband here, and so we formed our own family here. The second would be the weather. It's so different. In the Philippines, it's tropical, and then here it's cold. So when I was younger, I was able to bear the cold but as you get older, it's harder. Other challenges in the beginning, you know, you felt lonely, homesick, but work always got me so busy. And then the way you deal with that is you meet new friends, you meet new people, and then the gatherings, the get together, the participating in all these events, that's how you relieve your loneliness. So like when we mentioned about organizations, participating in different organizations, just not like yours, your own, like the Filipino organization. For me, it's healthier if you join all. So then you get to see all different cultures. I'm one wherein, yes, we get involved with our own group, but we also have to be open to other groups. That way you can assimilate. And now that we're also in America, you know, you assimilate with the Americans around you. So, you know, like you adapt to what they're doing here, but at the same time, you're also trying to maintain your own, preserving your own. So that's how I overcame it. And just being around everybody and using all these resources that we have, the organizations that we have. Here in Iowa, there's so many Filipino American associations, okay? Their goals and their outlook is about similar. And so just participating in all of them, because in every town there is an organization. The other organizations that deals with human rights and everything and helping newcomers, like Monsoon would help newcomers or people in need or people in distress or people in problems. And education is one thing. So they providing education to all our Filipino newcomers and whoever needs help. It's good that we know that we have them available. So that's how we can overcome our challenges.
I think for me, since I came to the US when I was in high school, basically, right? I think the most challenging is then I think I went to Roosevelt High School, and I remember there were only a few Asians. So therefore, I think that was the most challenging, is like you being different, or maybe you're the only Asian, or and I remember like there were Asians, but they were maybe the first generation or like former refugees, like maybe coming from Laos, Vietnam, right? So therefore, like for me, I think that was, but there's a big difference from like Filipinos and folks from Laos or even Vietnam. So for me, I was not familiar then yet, like when I was that age. So it's just like that so-called assimilating to the US culture. I think that was a challenge for, especially for like, if you're coming into the United States as a teenager, right? Especially high school is so difficult when everyone is white and you're the one who's quite different, right? So I think that was the most challenging, is that like being, how do you fit in? And then I think the teenage years is like, if you look at child development, those are the time that you really are trying to figure out who you are. So therefore, like if you are in a space where you don't see yourself more, that's a challenge. Not until I went to San Francisco, where, oh my God, there was just a bunch of Filipinos, like you have relatives all over the place. You see like daily city full of Filipinos. So therefore, I think it's so different when you have more folks who look like you, who speak the language, you know, like, so I think that's the big difference. I think it's just like for us, our family here, I think we were the only one that came to Iowa, and the rest are like on the West Coast. So I think it's just that there's this disconnection from family when we were in the Philippines. It's like your cousin just live around the corner, or maybe you're in the same compound, right? We call it compound because like one house is next to you is like your cousins, your uncles. So it's like the community is really your family. But as soon as you migrate outside of the Philippines. It's like there's that disconnection. So for me, I think that's the challenge, is like that disconnection from your family that, you know.
I'm curious to know, on the topic of connection, how did both of you come to find community? I can only imagine how hard it must have been in Iowa, especially before the time of social media where you could just go online and search things up. And I would like to know, how did you come to get closer to the community and get to know people in the Asian community as well?
It was through friends. I met friends who knew what was going on, and so that's what helps, is when the people that are here ahead of you are able to guide you as to where to go. So you start with friends, and then they take you to parties and then organizations. So that's how I got started. Getting involved in different things, you know, that's how you get to learn all these different, you know, places and events. So it's just a matter of you also finding out, reaching out to people. But yeah, just going out there and finding it too. Well, now it's easier because, like you said, there's technology, there's you see it on TV, on Facebook, on newsletters, but earlier, yeah, it was just through friends.
I think similar to Ate Malu, it's just also like, you know, your friends. And then for me in high school, there's really no, I don't remember like being friends with anyone who's Asian then. I think it's kind of like you, and like you living, you know, you grew up in Boone, and then I, you know, here. But maybe like I had friends from other races, right? Either white or black, but nothing like no Asians that I was connected with, not until I went to the Bay Area. And that's where I then volunteered for the San Francisco Asian Women's Shelter. I think that is where I connected with other Asians that are not just Filipinos, but are South Asians, Korean Americans. So because they are part of the Asian Women's Shelter then. So then I was one of the volunteers. And then I also became part of the Gabriela Network back then. So, so that was 89, 90, 91. I'm 52 now. So during that time, that was when I was part of Gabriela Network in the Bay Area, San Francisco Asian Women's Shelter. So I think it's that connection that I have had with the Filipino community already. And then I just meet people like that are, you know, Filipinas. So yeah.
I would add too, in church, you know.
Yeah, that's important.
When you go to church or in your school, or schools where you met, and then you meet people of similar, you know, background, may not be Filipino, but Asian, and then they know somebody. So you just assimilate, and that's how you get to know all these organizations and events.
But it seems like it's easier to make friends when you were younger. Because I think now that I'm in my 50s, it's so hard for me. It's so hard. Like, I think I keep the same folks, same friends that I've had since when I was in my 20s, early 20s and then 30s, right? So the ones who I know from grad school, I keep. But now it's like, it's really difficult. I don't know, Ate Malu, if you have the same. It's just like this difficulty of finding people
you know,
at a certain age.
My secret is I go out a lot. I go out a lot. And, you know, we're part resident of Florida, so we go back and forth. Would you believe we go to Florida and then we meet these people? It's like we just meet them by chance, and then they're involved in an organization. So now we're involved in this Asian Professional Association of Southwest Florida. So that's neat because it's like following us. And I'm saying I'm retired already. I want to slow down with my organization involvement. I just want to, I don't want to lead, but be more of like a participant, but it's pulling us that way. So, and it's good to know that there are these organizations because they do keep you involved. They keep you busy. And then you realize, yeah, it's fun. And that's what we've been doing. So, and that's how I make friends. You know, you get drawn to this event, you get drawn to this responsibility, and then it's I guess it's in the blood, or it's following you wherever you go. So that's my, that's what's happening.
Thank you, Marlou and Mira, for that. So moving on to the next question I have is, how have you seen migration impacting refugees or immigrants? And what barriers do you feel make it hard for healing?
What have you seen migration impacting refugees and immigrants? I think there's a surge of immigrants and refugees right now because of what's going on globally. And recently, you know, we've got a lot of immigrants from Europe. So it's good that there are refugees and immigrants, because we need to continue that, and helping them assimilate would be one of the things that is much needed. And it's now expanding to different cultures, not just Asians, because back then, in the earlier stages, it would be the Vietnam, you know, the Vietnamese who were refugees. And I've seen the new generation of Asian immigrants, because they are hardworking. You know, I've seen that they have prospered a lot. In the healing part, again, it's I think the presence of all these organizations, resources that we have, would help with the healing. So it's important that we have all these organizations around us. There are a lot of organizations around, so it's just a matter of reaching out to all these people.
I think for me anyway, how based on the work that we've been doing at Monsoon is like, and also like based on what we just like seen, is the fact that sometimes I think for the refugee community, the trauma of even like coming here, right? Because for majority of refugees who are seeking refuge from civil conflict from your own nation, from your own land, that's also traumatic. So I think that is one thing, is like we're bringing in trauma, we're bringing in experiences of violence, we're bringing in experiences of just civil conflict, right? Like that trauma from those. Even for immigrants, I think it's the same. When we have certain communities that had been, for example, in the Philippines, there was the the dictatorship under the Marcos regime. So there were like also that trauma that's from there. So I think we bring in violence. How it's impacting it is like we bring in this trauma to the new so-called home. And then sometimes I think organizations are sometimes not really talking about, or maybe creating spaces just to talk about those trauma. So therefore, for me, I think that is already a barrier. How then do you create spaces where assimilation and even migration in itself is traumatic? How then do we have a way beyond therapy that we can like have a discussion about that? How we can, I think those are the barriers that we're seeing. The violence that was impacted. So more like trauma for me, that's what we're seeing. And then also like the racism, and specifically the rise of anti-Asian racism, anti-Asian hate, like right after, during the height of COVID. I think that's because they're blaming us, like the ones who are looking more like Asians or like East Asians specifically. So I think those are the impact, right? There's so many. Yeah, so I think those are the major thing that I just want to highlight. Trauma, and then barriers is really like what like you can't really find a therapist who like from your own community, especially in Iowa, who speaks your language or understands your culture. So those are the things that I'm seeing.
That's why I think it's good to hone talents of each community. Like maybe, like when you say it's hard to find therapists, someone would come out from that group. So it's just maybe brainstorming with one another when each group meet, or a variety of group meets, and then identify what needs you have. Somehow someone will come up with that talent of like a therapist. Like in the Philippines, we have the barangay. You don't need, you settle it within your community. You can find someone there that would maybe be the mediator, or find a solution within that small group.
Yeah. Another thing is just like, I think newly arrived refugees or immigrants sometimes is just knowing where to get help, where to get assistance, what kind of resources, even the laws, right? What are the laws that will impact you? So we're seeing like sometimes women like calling in the police because they just want their husband to stop. They don't want the husband to be arrested. They just want the husband to stop, because in our community, sometimes police are seen like someone that will just stop but will not arrest the husband. Because all they want is like, can you just tell him to stop doing this to me, right? But then they get arrested, and all of a sudden the woman then is taken to a shelter. So that they don't know. They don't know that. So therefore they then become homeless or houseless. So therefore, but then they were like, I don't want him to be arrested. I just called the police because I just want them to stop it. So those are the things that I think a lot of times, like when you come to a new place, a new land, like just knowing like what are the process in certain things. And the only time that you learn about those things is then when you are in that situation. So you're not prepared for anything. Like, you're unprepared. So therefore you're like, oh my God, why did I call the police when I don't really want him to be arrested?
So that means that we need to provide education, a series of education that encompasses all these different topics. Because you're right, they would not know, because in their culture, it's okay, it's all right, but they don't know that in this environment, it is not. No. So that creates a record for their husband unknowingly, and that wasn't the right way to do it. And also, I think language is a barrier.
Yes.
Some people, some immigrants, they come, and like for the Filipinos, okay, there's a difference between knowing how to speak it, versus the comprehension. Some of them don't understand the details of what this statement means. So sometimes they still need translation. Yeah. So the Philippines is mostly English speaking. Most people can speak English. And there's the accent, so they don't get understood because there's an accent. And some of them don't really understand everything in a sentence. So they need, like I said, they still need translation or somebody explaining to them in detail. So those are the things that we need. And then for like our elderly population, they also get isolated, and they don't know, like in this recent COVID, some don't have families, like some families are out of state.
Yeah.
We're scattered all over, and we don't realize it that, these are the people that needs help. And as they get older, the older population also are getting older. And time goes by so fast that before you know it, oh my God, she's that age, and she's not talking because our culture too, in the Philippine culture, nahihiya, meaning you're afraid to ask. But actually, there can be help out there. So I think it's just identifying how we can help each other. Sometimes we don't want to help, or it appears like we don't want to help because we're protecting their privacy. Maybe they want to be private. So it's more of like talking directly to each other, like, what do you need or what?
Yeah.
So sometimes our traits can also be a hindrance when you're nahihiya.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Filipinos don't talk direct. They will go around the bush.
Yeah. So it's the shame, ashamed to ask for help.
Yeah. So those are barriers.
And then also for like different generations, right? I think intergenerational issues comes about, like you know, I'm a first generation, my child was born as a second generation Filipino, but mixed. So sometimes I think when we're talking about, like, for example, mental health, in the Filipino community, we don't talk about mental health. We don't go to like counseling. There's no such thing because of the shame. Because, you know, when we think about so-called therapists or psychologists or psychiatrists, we always assuming like someone is crazy. But in reality, it's just really the you know, like depression. Like, what does that mean in our community? So there are certain things that we that sometimes had been the impact, because I think there is this, you know, the new generation, the younger generation are more open to like mental health, wellness, mental wellness, but their parents are not. So therefore, we don't see like there might be signs of like suicide, right? We don't see it because we don't want to see it. And also we're not familiar of certain things that are like, that are focusing on maybe on mental health, even like, you know, if they have suicidal ideation. And then this issue of the pressure of the parents that you have to do really well. And if you fail, then there's this pressure, like I just failed as a daughter, as a son. So I think those are the things that I'm seeing as there's an impact between different generations. And then if we're thinking about health, it's mental health, mental wellness. It's like, how then do we, the barriers, like we don't talk about it. We don't, you know, there's a silence. When in reality, if we look at the Filipino community, not just in Iowa, but nationally, the high rate of suicide and the high rate of suicide attempts, right? So I think that is something that is really, like, for me, an emergency in our community. It's like, how then do we like focus on mental wellness? How do we take care of each other where they don't feel isolated? Then that can cause more depression, when in reality, for me, depression is all about then connection. Like, how then do we connect with each other to kind of like to cope with that feeling of, you know, feeling depressed or that isolation. Yeah.
That's why it's good to talk about it, because the more you talk about it, then it becomes like more open, because the tendency of not like hiding it, like let's be quiet about it, nakakahiya, it's embarrassing. That's what is a barrier.
Yes.
Whereas if we as a family have identify and accept there's a problem, and then helping out that person would probably prevent the suicide attempt or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and then there's a difference. We don't know between situational depression versus the real depression. Situational is only because of that certain situation, then it goes away. But we have to identify what the real depression is, and that would be classified under the mental illness, wherein they're going to go downhill and then with a suicidal attempt. So it's recognizing all those. So everything boils down to education, I think, providing all these maybe seminars or whatever, this method of talking, this conversation like this, maybe we can start something like this, because with conversing about it, then I might not be aware of what you're aware of, and talking about it makes me aware. Because if I was in a secluded environment, I don't see it, then I wouldn't care. But if I know that it's happening, then I'm concerned about it.
Yeah.
That's how I think. That's how I feel.
Thank you both for that. So before I go into that next question, I have a quick quote here that I want to say. So this quote is from Refugee Week UK, which is the biggest organization, or the organization that hosts the biggest celebratory week for Refugee Week. And the quote is, "Healing means recovering from a painful experience or situation so that we can continue to live. No one understands this better than those who have lost their homes and had to build new lives from scratch. We have much to learn from refugees about holding on to hope when going on seems impossible, as well as about how art, creativity, and community can help us to heal." So with that quote being said, I want to ask you both, what ways have you seen the Filipino community healing, and how can we take a positive role in healing community trauma?
You start, Mira.
So I think for community healing, for me, it's more about the traditional practices of the interconnection between individuals in the community, right? That Filipinos are all about socialan, meaning that means that you have to be with each other. It's like being with the community. I think for a lot of us, that is about healing, like being with each other. But there are also now a lot of Filipina American psychologists who are doing a lot of work about traditional psikoholiyang Filipino, meaning like the Filipino psychology, right? Basically like work by Dr. Virgilio, what's his name? Hernandez. I think more like Fernandez, who had done like a lot of work about Philippine psychology. Now that's being so-called adopted in the US by Kevin Nadal, Professor Nadal. There's like and then there's another professor from University of Alaska who's also doing a lot of work on psychology of the Filipino Americans. So those are the things that for me anyway, that we should be using as when we're thinking about healing, because there are certain Filipino values like utang na loob, right? That can either be like good and sometimes can be used as bad. That can be used like negatively. Like utang na loob is this obligation of the heart, obligation for like this tradition of thinking like if someone did something for you, that you have this you're basically in debt with this person forever, that you have to do something for them. That is like basically can also be toxic, right? So in a lot of ways, we need to have those discussions. So I think for me, it's really more about the connection with each other, talking about it. Those are crucial. And then looking at the traditional ways that Filipino scholars in the US that are what they're doing. There's a lot of Filipino academic who are doing the work already. And then I think if you are working in the community, these are the things that I think you should learn about, that then how can you apply it in practice? Because they are the one that like so-called, have theories and everything, but then we're the one that can practice. How do we practice what they have studied, what they have researched, what they have written about? So yeah, but for me, Filipino, like how we see like for community healing is really like that interconnection. Even just doing karaoke. Oh my God, Filipinos love karaoke and dancing, right? Yeah. Ate Malu.
Mira said it all. She explained it so well. Yeah. So that, just supporting one another, talking about it, communication, conversations, meeting, gathering. It's not all about parties. It's more about in-depth communication, I think, direct communication. So, and education is the number one. We got to continue to educate each other. So just to make everybody aware of what's going on, and then assuring them or encouraging them that we're here to help, because we have the Bayanihan spirit, and that's not just Filipino, but of all, different nationalities. So that's what a community is about. We're here to live within the community, not just nobody's an island. So we ask for help, we provide help. We have to identify what help is needed, and then that way we can reach out to those that need help.
Okay, and then for my last question here, to end on a positive note, how have you both seen the expansion of Filipina migration over the last several decades enrich the overall culture in the US? For me, I really look back into the Louisiana bayous and how the Filipino fishers there had left a long-lasting impact of providing that shrimping industry that Louisiana is now even so well known for, and has integrated so much of into their own culture and cuisines. And just learning about that is so interesting. And to see that Filipino history has direct impact to US history is a really interesting point that I've recently learned. So I'm curious to know what ways you have seen Filipino enrichment.
Well, the Filipinos have contributed a lot in all different aspects. Like you said, with participation in government. There's a lot of Filipinos now that are officials and policemen, professionals, organizations, what have you, medical. And in government too, there's in Ohio, there's a Filipino congressman. But anyway, to interject, I also am involved with the national level of Filipino Americans. So we have our organization, it's called National Federation of Filipino American Organization of USA. So it's all the states, and then we were divided into regions. So upcoming, we have a conference going on, and that's how we get abreast about what's going on in the whole United States. And then we advocate for whatever needs to be advocated for. I can be proud to say that they were instrumental in making dual citizenship a possibility. So, and then, so overall, I would say that we have enriched the culture in the United States with all our contributions, starting from labor, starting with when we went through history, laborers and all that. So our culture is rich, and so introducing it to America has made America really great.
Mine is gonna be like something that's like food wise. All of a sudden, ube, like the purple yam is so popular. So now I'm that for me, the expansion, like for me, it's now like Filipino food might be the in food, like the food that is trending, especially the purple yam. Everything is like ube. Right? So I that's a joke, but for me, I think that's one of them. I think that's what the United States is all about, is like, how then do we, like a salad bowl of different culture, how we integrate our own practices, our own food, our own culture to this land, but then at the same time being respectful to the natives, to the indigenous people of this land is as crucial. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add to what Ate Marlou had said. Basically, like, I know we're just meant to be here.
Well, thank you both, Marlou and Mira, for being here with us today for this conversation. I look forward to seeing and supporting your future work, and of course, Mira, working together under you. Yes. And I also want to thank our captioner for providing live captioning for today's event. Of course, a big thank you to everyone here for taking time out of your day to support Marlou, Mira, and Monsoon in general. This was a really great conversation, and I think I took a lot from it, and I'm sure those viewing and who will view later on Facebook will also take a lot from this. And I hope that we can continue conversations like this, because I know you both mentioned earlier how talking, communicating is so essential to community building and healing. And I hope conversations like this take place in the future as well. Before we close out though, I also want to mention that evaluation form that will be sent out to everyone through your emails, anyone that's registered in the past panels to now. So if you've attended any of those past panels and haven't filled out yet, please do. And with that being said, I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Thank you all again for being here. This is a really great conversation, and I hope everyone takes a little.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Mira, for inviting me. This was fun. I hope we have more of this.
Don't worry, we'll have more.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Happy lunch.